Can you nurse him just for once? The cowboy pleaded, and the obese girl held the baby close. The sun was sinking low over the prairie when Elias Turner came thundering toward Willow Creek, his horse lathered in sweat, his shirt clinging to him like a second skin. He leaned forward in the saddle as though he could shield the tiny bundle in his arms from the wind, from the dust, from the world itself. Little Micah whimpered weakly against his father's chest. Every sound the baby made, those fragile gasps, that thin rattling cry, struck Elias like a blow. The doctor at the far ranch had said he needed a woman's closeness, a woman's warmth, something soft and steady to calm his fevered breathing. Elias had ridden fast, too fast, to town, praying the whole way that someone would help him. He was willing to beg. He was willing to drop to his knees. He was willing to give anything if it meant saving his son. When he pushed open the door of the general store, the bell jingled wildly, almost alarmed by the man who burst in. Folks turned in surprise, then in unease. Elias looked like a man who had fought something invisible and nearly lost. His voice cracked as he pleaded, "Please, my boy can't breathe right. I need someone who can hold him close. Just once. Just to help him calm down." The room stilled. A woman with flour on her apron glanced away. A mother of 3 children kept her arms firmly crossed. A couple of men shifted uncomfortably, pretending to inspect nails and bolts. No one stepped forward. Not a single soul. Micah let out a thin cry that cut through the store like a blade. Elias's face crumpled. "Please," he whispered. "Don't let him die." From behind a shelf of dry goods, a girl slowly stepped forward. She was large, soft-faced, and quiet. Hannah Mae Dobbs, the girl who stocked the shelves and swept the floors and was spoken of mostly in hushed, unkind tones. Willow Creek had never been gentle with her. Her cheeks were round, her arms full, her steps careful as though she feared taking up too much space in the world. But her eyes were deep with kindness. She looked directly at the baby. "Is he very sick?" she asked softly. Elias turned to her with a desperation that made even the loftiest townsfolk swallow hard. "He hasn't breathed steady in hours. Doctor said a woman's warmth might help. Someone to hold him close, even just once." The store was silent again, but it was a different kind of silence. One filled with curiosity, disbelief, and a touch of judgment. A few women whispered behind their hands. That girl? That overweight, quiet girl no man looked twice at?" But Hannah didn't hear them. Or maybe she did. She'd spent her whole life hearing whispers. But right now all she saw was the tiny, feverish child fighting for breath. She felt a trembling inside her chest, like a door she'd kept shut for years was creaking open. She lifted her hand toward the baby, hesitated, then placed her palm gently against his tiny back. He was burning with fever. His little breaths were fast and frightened, like a bird trapped in a storm. "Poor thing," she murmured, her voice breaking. When she looked up, Elias was staring at her with raw hope in his eyes. Eyes of a man who had fallen past pride and into prayer. "I'll beg if I have to," he whispered. "You're the only one who stepped forward." Hannah's breath caught. She wasn't beautiful like the other women in town. She wasn't married. No man had ever looked at her with admiration or need. Yet here was a father kneeling before her, not out of romance, not out of desire, but out of utter faith that she might save his child. And deep inside her, something sacred awakened. "Give him to me," she said quietly. Elias let out a trembling breath and placed Micah in her arms. Hannah held the baby carefully, tenderly, bringing him close to her soft chest. He whimpered once more, then something extraordinary happened. His breathing slowed. His tiny hands unclenched. His body relaxed against her as though she were a harbor he had been searching for. The whispers in the store faded. The stares ceased to matter. Hannah felt the baby's heartbeat against her own, felt the warmth of his small body, and a tear slipped down her cheek, not from sadness but from a feeling she'd never known before. Purpose. Elias sank to his knees, covering his face as his shoulders shook. "Thank you, Lord," he choked out. "Thank you for sending her." And standing there in the center of that dusty general store, with the baby finally breathing steady in her arms, Hannah Mae Dobbs felt something she hadn't felt in years, maybe ever. Chosen. Used by God for a moment bigger than her pain, bigger than her insecurities, bigger than the stares around her. In that moment she was not the obese girl of Willow Creek. She was the girl God had placed in the right place at the right time to save a life. And nothing, absolutely nothing, could take that purpose away from her now. Outside the general store, thunder rumbled across the plains, as if heaven itself were leaning close to listen. Clouds gathered in the distance, thick and heavy, But inside the store the air felt even heavier, thick with expectation, murmurs, and the stunned silence of people realizing something holy was happening right in front of them. Hannah Mae Dobbs held baby Micah close, her arms trembling with the weight of responsibility, fear, and something she couldn't quite name, something warm and trembling like light flickering deep beneath her ribs. Micah's cheek rested against her softness, his breath shallow but steadier than before. His tiny fingers curled into the fabric of her dress, as though clinging to the life within her. Elias Turner rose slowly from the floor, wiping a hand across his eyes, but tears still clung stubbornly to his lashes. His hat lay forgotten near his boots. "Miss Hannah," he said, voice raw, I don't have words. You stepped in when no one else." A harsh throat-clearing interrupted him. The doctor had finally rushed in, old Dr. Hale, hair white as cotton, spectacles fogged from the quick ride over. His gaze swept the room, landing on the baby in Hannah's arms. "What's this?" he asked gruffly, kneeling beside her. He placed his weathered hand on Micah's forehead, then frowned deeply. "He's fevered. Badly." He adjusted his spectacles, studying Hannah's hold on the child. Her arms firm, her touch gentle, her breath steady against Micah's temple. "This is good," the doctor murmured. "He needs warmth. Come. The closeness of a woman's body. It'll steady his breathing, might just keep the fever from climbing higher." Several women in the back exchanged uncomfortable glances, as if reminded that they had all refused the very thing this girl now offered without hesitation. Hannah felt their eyes on her like needles pressing into her skin, but she didn't waver. Micah whimpered softly and she rocked him instinctively, humming without thinking, a soft old hymn about mercy and mountains moving. Dr. Hale nodded approvingly. "Just like that. Don't let him get chilled. Keep him close." The room shifted. You could feel it, something unseen, something wholly wrapping itself gently, protectively around the girl who had always lived in the shadows. The whispers rise. But kindness doesn't silence cruelty. Not in a town like Willow Creek. One woman, thin, prim, proud, lifted her chin. "Surely there's someone more suitable," she muttered. "Someone more proper." Beside her, another sniffed. "I don't think this is decent. Letting her do it." Hannah heard them. Every word. Every unkind syllable. She always did. Elias turned slowly, anger simmering beneath his grief. His voice was low but sharp enough to cut through stone. "If God chose her hands," he said, "then who are any of you to question his choice?" The room went quiet again. Completely. Hannah's breathed prayer. As the whispers died, Hannah stared down at Micah's tiny face, flushed, exhausted, fragile. She brushed a thumb across his cheek and he made a soft sound that felt like a plea. Her heart pulled tight. She had been overlooked her whole life. Talked about rather than spoken to. Judged before known. But this child didn't judge her. He didn't shrink away from her. He didn't whisper about her size or her worth. He simply rested against her as though she belonged in this moment. Hannah glanced at Elias, whose face was lined with desperation and hope and humility all tangled together. He looked at her not with pity, not with embarrassment, but with awe, and something inside her settled. She whispered a prayer in her heart, simple, trembling. "Lord, if you need me, I'm here. Use me." When she looked up, there was a new steadiness in her eyes. "I'll take care of him," she said softly. "As long as he needs." Elias exhaled shakily, like a man returning from the edge of a cliff. "Thank you," he breathed. "God bless you, Miss Hannah." The room watches a miracle begin. The doctor instructed a few more things. Warm cloths, no drafts, gentle holding, but everyone's eyes were really on Hannah. On the way she cradled Micah with such focused tenderness. On the quiet hymn still rumbling in her chest like a soothing heartbeat. On the peace that seemed to settle over the infant the longer he rested against her. A peace that whispered quietly through the store. "This is right. This is God's doing." Thunder boomed louder outside, shaking the windows. The storm was coming. And it wasn't just the one in the sky. Because as baby Micah continued breathing calmly, a new storm began to gather in the hearts of everyone watching. An unspoken realization, uncomfortable and undeniable. The girl they overlooked had been the one God looked at all along. And now, with Micah's tiny breaths warming her chest and Elias's hope fixed on her like lifeline, Hannah Mae Dobbs understood something she had never dared to believe. She mattered. Her softness mattered. Her presence mattered. God had placed her here, this exact moment, this exact need, because no one else would step forward. Only her. Only Hannah. Only the girl who had been judged unworthy by people, but fully seen by heaven. By the time the doctor finished giving instructions and the last murmurs in the store faded, the thunder outside had multiplied. Rain began to spit against the windows, scattered drops that promised a downpour. Hannah still held Micah close, rocking him gently, her cheek resting near his tiny head. His breathing, though fragile, had steadied like a flickering candle gaining strength. Elias hovered nearby, torn between exhaustion and relief, blinking often as if afraid the moment might vanish if he looked away. "You can't take him back out in that weather," Dr. Hale said firmly, nodding toward the window where lightning sketched jagged lines across the sky. "Not with a fever like this. He needs warmth, a fire, and a woman's care for a bit longer." Elias looked torn. "I'll stay in the livery stable then. Me and Micah can." "No," the doctor cut sharply. "He won't survive the night without a warm room." The word struck Elias like a blow. That was when a gentle voice rose behind him. "You can stay with us." Hannah's mother, Mrs. Dobbs, a sturdy woman with kind eyes and flowers still dusting her sleeves, stood in the doorway of the back room. She'd watched everything quietly, her daughter's bravery, the town's shame, Elias's desperation. "Bring the baby into our home," she said. "The Lord brought you here for a reason." Hannah's arms tightened instinctively around Micah. Something within her, something soft and trembling and knew she did not want to let him go. Not yet. Not until he was safe. Elias swallowed hard, his voice thick. "Ma'am, I don't want to trouble your household." Mrs. Dobbs gave him a look that allowed no argument. "Son, trouble is when you spill molasses across my floor. Saving a child's life isn't trouble. Come." And with that the decision was made. The storm gathers. Hannah kept Micah close as they stepped out into the rain, which had begun falling in hurried sheets. Elias walked beside her, holding his hat over the baby, though Hannah was already shielding him with her body. The Dobbs home was just behind the store, a modest wooden house with smoke curling from the chimney and a warm glow in the window. As they hurried inside, the warmth hit them like an embrace. Hannah's father was already tending the fire, adding logs until it crackled bright and strong. "Lay the baby near the hearth," Mrs. Dobbs instructed, placing blankets near the rocking chair. "But not too close." Hannah sat down gently, adjusting Micah against her. His little breaths came softer now, less frantic. Whenever they hitched or trembled, she rocked and hummed again, letting her voice soothe him like a soft river running over stones. Elias watched from the side of the room, his hands trembling at his sides. He had never seen anything like it. How this stranger, this soft-spoken girl others dismissed, could bring such peace to his suffering child. A quiet moment between two strangers. As the fire warmed the room and the storm pounded the roof, Elias stepped closer. "You saved him," he said quietly. I don't know why you chose to help, but you did." Hannah blinked, eyes still fixed on Micah. "He needed someone," she murmured. "That's reason enough." "That's more than most folks offered," Elias whispered. She didn't answer. She didn't need to. The truth was already written across the room. The people who judged her hadn't stepped forward. The people who whispered behind her back hadn't lifted a finger. But she had. And for the first time in many years Hannah felt brave. Elias rubbed the back of his neck, his voice softer now, stripped of pride. "I should have known God wouldn't leave us alone. He always sends help, even if it doesn't come in the way we expect." Hannah glanced up at that, her eyes flickering with something vulnerable. She wasn't used to being part of God's plans, not in the eyes of the town. But maybe heaven didn't see her the way humans did. "Sometimes," she whispered, "He uses the people no one else looks at." Their eyes met. Something quiet passed between them, something deeper than gratitude, gentler than admiration, but rooted in the same soil. Respect, recognition, purpose. The night deepens. Micah made a soft cry, and Hannah instantly shifted, holding him closer. Elias watched as the infant pressed his cheek against her softness, soothed instantly. Hannah's humming returned, soft, warm, almost angelic. Her voice wrapped around the baby and filled the room with a tender peace. Mrs. Dobbs paused in the kitchen doorway, watching the scene with a knowing smile. "That baby's taken to you, Hannah girl," she said softly. Hannah's cheeks warmed. "I think he just needs comfort." "Or maybe," Mrs. Dobbs replied, "God knew whose arms he needed tonight." The rain hammered harder outside. Inside, the fire glowed, the air thick with warmth and the scent of baking bread. Elias sat on a stool near the hearth, elbows on his knees, head bowed, praying without speaking. Hannah rocked with slow, steady rhythm, her eyes drifting to Elias, to the fire, then back to Micah, who was finally breathing peacefully, his tiny chest rising and falling against her. In that humble room with the storm raging around them, 3 lives, Elias, Micah and Hannah, were quietly, gently braided together by the hands of God. A man who had lost hope. A baby fighting for life. A girl who had spent her whole life unseen. And on this stormy night, heaven set them on a path no one could have predicted. Not even them. Mara did not return to her small cabin immediately. She walked slowly, each step dragging behind the next as though the weight on her heart had doubled. The wind tugged at her shawl, the early evening sun sinking behind the cottonwoods like a tired lantern. She had held a baby. A real baby. Warm. Fragile. And for the first time in years someone had needed her. But the moment had ended too quickly. Inside Caleb's cabin she had felt seen. Not stared at. Not mocked. Not dismissed. No, Caleb had looked at her the way a thirsty man looks at a cup of water. Longing, grateful, hopeful. And that tiny boy, Josiah, had rested in her arms like she was safe. Like she wasn't the oversized, unwanted girl the town whispered about, but a shelter. A haven. She reached her cabin door and paused, resting her large hand against the wood. Her breathing hitched. Her throat tightened. "Lord," she whispered, her voice trembling, "what are you doing with me? I ain't important. I ain't special. I'm just me." She pushed the door open. The cabin was quiet, shadowy, still smelling faintly of flour and the biscuits she had baked that morning. It struck her then she lived alone. Completely alone. And she had grown comfortable with silence. Perhaps too comfortable. Her own mother had passed when she was 14. Her father died 2 winters later. By the time she turned 20, she had stopped expecting companionship. When she sat on her small bed, the boards creaking under her weight, the tears finally came. Not loud sobs. Not dramatic weeping. Just soft, heavy tears that slid down her round cheeks and dampened her apron. She pressed her hands together, palms trembling. "God, why him? Why today? Why would you send a cowboy with a hungry baby to my doorstep?" The silence stretched. But not an empty silence. One of those tender, holy kinds that felt like being held. She remembered the warmth of Josiah's tiny body. The way his fist had curled gently against her chest. The peacefulness on his face when her heartbeat had lulled him. She remembered Caleb's voice, raw with worry and hope. "Can you nurse him just for once?" He hadn't looked at her like she was grotesque or inconvenient. He had looked at her like she had value. Real value. She sniffed and wiped her face with her sleeve, leaving streaks across her fair skin. "Oh Lord," she whispered, "if you want me to help that child, if you want me to help that man, then give me strength. Give me wisdom. And please soften their hearts toward me. For once in my life let me matter. Even just a little." A gentle breeze drifted through the cracked window, making the candlelight flicker. And in that flicker, Mara felt something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. Small. Quiet. Newborn, like Caleb's son. She stood and moved toward the table where her Bible lay, its pages worn and marked with use. She opened it, letting it fall wherever God chose. Her eyes landed on a verse. "He healeth the broken in heart and bindeth up their wounds." Psalm 147 verse 3. Her breath trembled. Her heart steadied. "All right, Lord," she murmured softly. "If this is your doing, then I'll walk the path you're setting beneath my feet." And though she didn't yet know it, that simple whispered yes would change everything. Her heart, her future, and the lonely cowboy who had knocked on her door with a desperate plea. Caleb barely slept that night. Josiah fussed restlessly in his cradle, and the wind kept rattling the loose shingles on the roof. But it wasn't the baby or the weather that held Caleb's thoughts captive. It was Mara. The way she had held Josiah, gentle but steady. The way the baby had quieted instantly, as if her arms were the place he had been searching for since birth. And her face. Not just her soft, rounded features. No, it was her expression. Something tender, hurting, and holy all mixed together. Lord, who is she really? He found himself asking the question more than once. By dawn, Caleb had made up his mind. He wrapped Josiah snug in a quilt, saddled his horse and rode toward Mara's cabin. The air was cool, the sky tinted pink with the promise of a new day. He rehearsed what he would say, how he would explain that the baby needed her again, how he didn't want to impose, how he wasn't trying to take advantage. But as he approached her little house, he saw something he hadn't expected. Mara was already on the porch, sitting on a rocking chair, and praying. Her hands were folded, head bowed, lips moving quietly. Her Bible was open on her lap, the pages fluttering in the breeze. Morning sunlight spilled over her like a blessing, catching in her hair and softening her silhouette. Caleb stopped his horse a few yards away, suddenly afraid to interrupt something sacred. But Mara heard the hoofbeats and looked up. Her eyes widened slightly, then softened. "Good mornin', Caleb," she said gently, standing. Her hands fidgeted with the apron tied around her full waist. "Is Josiah all right?" Caleb swallowed, his voice rougher than he expected. "He is. But he wouldn't settle. He cried most of the night." He paused, adjusting Josiah in his arms. I think he needs you again." A blush warmed Mara's cheeks, spreading like dawn across a quiet field. "Well," she murmured, stepping closer, I prayed last night, asking the Lord to show me what he wanted me to do." Caleb's brow rose. "And?" She hesitated just a heartbeat, but her eyes glowed with the fragile courage only faith can give. "And he told me not to turn away." Caleb exhaled slowly, relief filling him like breath after being underwater too long. "I'm grateful," he said quietly. "More than you know." She reached for the baby, hesitant at first, then with growing certainty, and Josiah curled into her immediately, tucking his tiny face into the curve of her chest. Like yesterday. Like instinct. Like home. Something in Caleb's chest shifted, unexpected, uninvited, but impossible to ignore. Mara glanced up at him. "He trusts easy," she whispered. Caleb shook his head, eyes warming. "No. He trusts you." Her breath caught. They walked inside together, awkward at first, both uncertain of the lines between them. Mara sat in her rocking chair, nursing Josiah quietly while Caleb stood by the window, hat in his hands, twisting it nervously. After a while he finally spoke. "Mara, I should tell you the truth. I didn't just lose my wife last winter. I lost myself. I've been begging God for help, but I didn't expect it to come knocking in the shape of—" He stopped himself, suddenly embarrassed. "In the shape of what?" Mara asked softly. He dared a glance at her, her kind eyes, her plump arms cradling his son, her softness that felt like safety. "In the shape of you," he finished. Her breath trembled, not out of offense but out of something she wasn't used to, being spoken of with value. She looked down at the baby, stroking his tiny hand as he nursed. "Well," she whispered, "maybe God's answering us both." A quiet hung between them, gentle, hesitant, warm. Outside the sun climbed higher. Inside something deeper was rising too. And neither of them knew it yet, but this day, this quiet morning, was the moment God interrupted their old lives. To begin writing a new one. Together. By the end of that week, everyone in town had heard at least one version of the same rumor. The obese girl is feeding the cowboy's baby. Caleb's at Mara's place every day now. He must be desperate. Or she trapped him somehow. How else would a man like him look twice at a girl like her? Mara didn't have to hear the words directly. She felt them in the way conversations stopped when she walked into the mercantile. She felt them in the way Mrs. Hargreaves narrowed her eyes like she was examining spoiled milk. She felt them in the way the ranch hands smirked as they leaned on fence rails. But worst of all, she believed them. One chilly afternoon, Mara hurried down the dusty street with a small jar of goat milk and a loaf of bread wrapped in cloth. She kept her eyes low, avoiding the stare she felt stabbing her back. Her heart pounded. Her hands trembled. But she kept walking toward Caleb's cabin. Inside she found Caleb kneeling by the fire, stirring a small pot of porridge for Josiah. The baby was fussing lightly in his cradle. Caleb looked up as soon as she stepped inside. And when he smiled, soft, warm, thankful, Mara felt her entire chest loosen. "You came," he said simply. "Of course," she whispered. "Josiah needed feeding, didn't he?" Caleb stood and reached for the jar she carried. "You've done more for us this week than anyone else in this whole town." Mara shook her head, cheeks warming. "That ain't true." "Yes, Mara," he said, stepping closer. "It is." But before she could answer, a loud slam echoed outside. Voices rose sharply, muffled by the walls but unmistakably harsh. Caleb's jaw tightened. Mara froze. He moved toward the door. "Mara, stay here." When he stepped outside, she could hear the sharp, ugly tones of two ranch hands, men from town who had never spoken kindly about her. "What are you doing bringing her here every day, Caleb?" one sneered. "She got you bewitched or something," the other added. "Ain't right, a man like you dependin' on that." There was laughter. Cruel. Cutting. Mara's heart clenched. Her stomach dropped. Tears pooled, but she kept herself still, breathing as quietly as possible. Then Caleb's voice thundered in a tone she had never heard from him. "Don't you ever speak of her that way again." Silence. She imagined their shock. Caleb Becker wasn't a man who raised his voice. She saved my son, he continued, voice rough with anger. She's shown more kindness than this entire town combined. So unless you're bringing help or a warm meal, get off my land. Bootsteps retreated. A horse snorted. Then, quiet. The door opened again. Caleb stepped inside, chest rising and falling heavily. When he looked at Mara, sitting stiff, hands clutched together, something in his expression softened deeply. Her voice came out small and shaking. You didn't have to shout on my account. He removed his hat, ran a hand through his hair and walked toward her slowly. Yes, Mara, he said gently, I did. She swallowed thickly. People think awful things. Maybe they're right. Maybe I shouldn't be. Mara. His voice was soft but firm. She dared to look up. What they said ain't true, he said. And deep down I reckon you know that. You've been a blessing from the second I stepped into your cabin. Josiah wouldn't be alive without you. Her breath trembled. Her eyes filled. And me? Caleb added quietly. I reckon I wouldn't be standin' this steady without you either. The room fell silent, warm and holy. She couldn't speak. Not yet. Her heart was shaking too hard. A low rumble of thunder rolled in the distance, the beginning of a storm, but inside that small cabin, something else was gathering strength. Comfort, courage, connection, and a kind of love neither of them dared name yet, but both felt growing like a seed God himself had planted. Caleb stepped closer. Stay for a while? He asked softly. Mara nodded, brushing a tear away. I'll stay. And so she did, unaware that the storm outside was about to test their fragile bond. And the storm inside her would test her heart even more. The storm rolled in with a wild ferocity the town hadn't seen in months. Sheets of rain, howling wind, thunder shaking the very bones of the cabins scattered across the valley. Caleb's lantern flickered where it hung, casting trembling shadows along the wooden walls. Josiah whimpered in his cradle, the wind prying at the windows like a desperate hand. Mara rose immediately, her instinct sharp. Bring him here, she said gently, opening her arms. Caleb didn't question. He lifted Josiah and placed him into the soft cradle of her embrace. She held the baby close to her chest, humming a trembling lullaby, something her mother used to sing on stormy nights long ago. Her voice was low, soothing, warm as firelight. Josiah quieted. Caleb exhaled. And for the first time that night, the storm outside didn't feel quite so frightening. But the one inside Mara, that one still raged. She sat by the crackling hearth, Josiah tucked securely in her arms, while her thoughts spiraled like the wind outside. What if this isn't real? What if Caleb only needs me, not wants me? What if the town is right? Her large frame tensed as fear twisted inside her. She didn't notice Caleb watching her, studying her face with quiet concern. Mara? He asked softly. She looked up, startled. He knelt beside her chair, not standing above her, not demanding. Kneeling. I can tell something's eaten at you. She looked down at the baby, at her arms wrapped protectively around him, and her voice cracked. Caleb, I don't belong in your life. Not really. Folks are talking. They say you're desperate, that I'm only good for feeding your child, 'cause. Her voice failed. She swallowed hard. Because I'm big enough. Caleb went still. The wind roared outside, rattling the shutters, but the room grew hushed, holy almost. He reached out, placing his hand gently on her wrist. Mara, look at me. She hesitated, then lifted her eyes. I don't care what they say, he said, voice deep and steady. I ain't a fool and I ain't blind. He paused, breath trembling as he continued. You think I keep coming to you because you're convenient? No, Mara. I keep coming because you're good. Because God put you in my path when I needed someone real. Someone gentle. Someone with a heart big enough to hold a baby who lost his mama, and a man who lost his way. Her breath hitched. Caleb's next words came softly, shaped by sincerity and shaken courage. The Lord didn't make a mistake when he made you. And he sure didn't make a mistake when he brought you to me. Tears spilled down Mara's cheeks silently. Josiah stirred, sensing the emotion, and Caleb touched the baby's tiny hand with a tenderness that surprised even him. I prayed, Mara, he whispered. After my wife died, I prayed for God to send someone who could help me raise my boy. Someone with love in their bones. I didn't expect him to answer the way he did. He swallowed hard. But I know, without a doubt, he sent you. Mara covered her mouth with her free hand, overwhelmed. Her whole life she had been overlooked, dismissed, or laughed at. But here, right here, she was chosen. Wanted. Valued. "Caleb," she whispered, voice trembling. He shook his head gently, a faint smile rising. "I ain't a skin for a promise tonight. And I ain't pressing your heart faster than it wants to move. But I want you to know this, whatever the Lord has in store for us, Mara, I ain't ashamed of it. Or you." Lightning flashed. Thunder cracked. But inside that small cabin, peace settled like warm oil over wounded hearts. Slowly, carefully, Caleb reached up and wiped one of her tears with his thumb. "Stay through the storm," he murmured. "Both storms, the one outside and the one you carry inside." Something soft unfurled inside her. "Hope. Brave hope." "I'll stay," she whispered. And she did. Through the night, through the storm, through the tears and the healing silence. At dawn, when the golden light spilled into the cabin, Caleb found her asleep in the rocking chair, Josiah resting contentedly on her chest. He stood there for a long time, simply watching. Something like awe stirred in him, quiet, profound, God-given. Then he whispered the words that had been forming in his heart all night. "Thank you, Lord, for sending her." Outside the storm had passed. Inside something new had begun. Not romance, not yet. But the first tender chapter of a love God himself was gently writing. A home forming. A family taking shape. A future unfolding. One that neither Caleb nor Mara had dared to imagine. Until God brought them together in the most unexpected, grace-filled way.